Namo Furobosa, Namo Furobosa, Namo Furobosa.
So, welcome everyone to this evening's celebration of the Liturgy of the Day. My name is Osho Brad with the Dragonfly Sangha, and let us start by sharing the peace. May all beings awaken to that peace which is our true home. Let us take refuge. I take refuge in the ground of being, within which I live and move and breathe. Let us make the accord. I take sanctuary in the heart of being, accepting all of my delusions in thought, word, or deed, born of ignorance, hatred, and greed. Let us give thanks. I give thanks for all beings, awakening to the interbeing of all nature. May my heart be open and my mind clear. May all be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, and may all come to know that peace which is beyond all understanding. Since it is the practice of enlightenment, that practice has no beginning. And since it is enlightenment within the practice, that realization has no end. And I thought I should share very briefly before I get into the Dharma talk. We celebrate the Liturgy of the Day, which is one of many liturgies that we have in our Book of Common Meditation. And would encourage you, if you practice with us regularly, either in person or through these virtual Dharma talks as well, you can certainly take a look and buy our Book of Common Meditation. It's available on Amazon. Just look for it there. It has a picture of the front of the book that all the priests sign as we enter seminary. But the Book of Common Meditation is available for everyone, and it has this liturgy as well as all of our seasonal liturgies and our liturgical year that sort of follows the story of the Buddha. So if you would like to follow along, we have that book available. But with that, let's begin this evening's Dharma talk. So I was inspired to speak about this subject by an email that I got the other day, that I read the other day, from someone who had written in response to a podcast episode that I'd done. I sometimes co-host a podcast with with two friends of mine. And the topic of that podcast and the subject of this email was around, are things getting better or things getting worse? And just kind of let's talk about that a bit. And the person who wrote in said they felt things were getting worse, and they gave a bunch of reasons for why they think that is. And my co-hosts and I on the podcast were sort of split on the issue. I tend to be a pretty optimistic person, but I did acknowledge the fact that, even if things might be getting better in a lot of ways, there is an overarching tone of pessimism in the zeitgeist, right? So even if things are getting better, it can feel like things are getting worse because of the tone, right? And and I'm sure a lot of us encounter pessimism and fear, both in person and in, online interactions as well. And this isn't to say, no amount of optimism can ignore the fact that there are things that need to be fixed. There are problems that need to be fixed. We have work to do as a society. There are people, who do want power and want to take actions that, including legislative action that could cause harm to certain groups of people or people with certain beliefs. I just don't know that an attitude of pessimism helps that at all. I think it contributes to the noise and to the dour tone. And like I said, I imagine a lot of us encounter pessimism on a daily basis, either in ourselves or in other people. And there's a lot of news that we hear that causes us to feel kind of pessimistic and make us think that things are getting worse. A lot of talk about heading into a recession. Inflation is at a 40-year high. Russia has been trying to take over Ukraine, and we see these constant images of, suffering there. Similar fears around what if China would do the same thing, with Taiwan. COVID's still out there. Republicans and Democrats in the U.S. are just at each other's throats and yelling at each other every day. And, crime, poverty, violence, national disasters, right? There's no shortage. The list goes on and on. And that's sort of at a global perspective, right? Individually, there's a lot of reasons that we find to be upset and be pessimistic. Hate my job. Everyone's so rude. I'm fighting with, my best friend. We got into a spat over something. I tore my favorite pants. My milk went bad. Right? There's any number of things from the big and the really upsetting to the minor that we have to deal with. And it's easy to get caught up in all of that, to get caught up in the bad news, to get caught up in the media, to see nothing else, lose hope, and assume that life just stinks. Right? It was a podcast that I used to listen to and really don't anymore for this reason. But, one of the hosts would kind of kick off and jokingly say, like, society is crumbling around us. And that bothered me. So I'm like, if you're putting something out into the world, don't broadcast pessimism. Don't spread that message. Right? If you have a platform where you can share things. Because here's the thing, if we find ourselves in a pessimistic place, we shouldn't just give ourselves over to that and just broadcast it, right? We should investigate it. Why are we feeling that way? Don't just shrug and say, well, I guess it's just the way it is, right? Everything stinks. If we feel pessimism in one area or several areas of our lives, or just general pessimism, it means we're being afflicted by negative mental states, right? And pessimism is unhealthy, right? This isn't good for us mentally or physically. Studies show it increases stress, right? Which can, increase our risk of heart disease. It can, damage brain cells, right? So pessimism isn't a healthy thing for us. And what's worse, it can spread, in our own lives, so I was pessimistic about this thing and really gave myself over to it. And well, now this thing stinks and this thing is stupid, and then we can spread it to other people. It's almost like kind of a mental disease. Now they feel bad, right? Because I just spent an hour, we went out for coffee, and all I just did was complain the whole time, right? And now they're brought down. And they're going to go and they're going to spread that. And is that really what we should be doing? Is that really where our energy should be spent? And there's that temptation when we're being pessimistic, and I felt this. Or just like, I'm just telling it like it is. Just calling them as I see them, right? Or maybe a bit more subtly, on a subconscious level, we're protecting ourselves by being pessimistic and just, shoving things away and saying, well, that's bad, because we're trying to be on guard. But we need to work with these pessimistic impulses, right? And here's the thing, you're watching a Buddhist priest, so let's see what the Buddha has to say about pessimism, right? And here's the ironic thing, at first blush, when you look at Buddhism, it's possible to say, like, boy, is Buddhism kind of pessimistic? Because we look at the Four Noble Truths, which is one of the first things that people will often bring up when they talk about Buddhism, right? Some of the major teachings, the Four Noble Truths. First one, right? What's this, the Buddha is saying that life is suffering, and, something about noble truths and that life just stinks, right? It's not what the Buddha said, but he did start off, his first sermon saying, like, hey, we suffer. But being pessimistic is looking at that first truth, the beginning of the sermon, but not paying attention until the end. Not paying attention to those other three truths, namely that there's a reason for that suffering and that pessimism, that suffering can end, and then he talks through how we might do it. And the Buddha didn't lead with suffering as the first truth, because it's the overarching feature of human living, and just like, well, this is just, life stinks, get used to it, right? He did it because we all relate to it. We all struggle with it. It unites us as a common experience because we've all suffered. We've all had bad days. We've lost someone. We've been sick, or we've suffered an injury, or someone we love has been sick or injured. And we all want to suffer less. It's a unifying thing, right? It actually connects us in a very beautiful way. Suffering is that universal wobbly wheel on the wagon. And I love that analogy for suffering, right? We know the word suffering comes from dukkha, right? Sanskrit word dukkha, D-U-K-K-H-A. A better translation, and you've probably heard me say this plenty of times, so I apologize, but a better translation of that word dukkha is unsatisfactoriness, or unease, or even stress, right? We all know what those feel like. Something's off. Life isn't puppies and rainbows. That stinks. Life isn't like the movies. Or my favorite analog for, a popular representation of contentment, a Folgers commercial, right? The person just, sniffing in the coffee grounds as the light hits just right. It's just after sunrise, probably in a cabin on a lake. They're getting ready for the big fishing trip. Not a care in the world. Music is playing, leads up to Folgers in your cup, right? What a perfect moment. My life isn't like that, so I suffer. Because I have that idea in my head. Why can't it be like that? Because no, I'm worried, right? I'm scared of the stuff I'm seeing on TV. You don't see the news playing in the background of a Folgers commercial. I'm nervous about upcoming travel. What if my flight is canceled? What if the plane crashes? What if I get lost? What if it rains the whole time when I'm trying to relax or find my way around? One of my favorite movies, What About Bob? To quote Bob Wiley from that movie, what if I'm looking for a bathroom, I can't find one, and my bladder explodes? Right? Wobble, wobble, wobble. There's always something either realistic or ridiculous to worry about. And that causes us to suffer. Because we believe that worry. We become very pessimistic when we give in to those worries. Right? We all do it. And the Buddha knew what he was doing when he started with suffering, because he knew that people could relate. We all worry. We all agonize. We're all afraid sometimes. And because of that, it's easy to adopt an attitude of general pessimism. But remember, the Buddha didn't stop there. If he did, then by all means, let's be pessimistic, because he just gave us a really kind of a bummer of a sermon. But he didn't stop there. He went on to say, there's a reason behind the wobble, right? And that reason is because we're grasping. We're clinging to things that can't really be clung to. We don't want things to change, even though they inevitably change. We don't think we deserve what's happening. We want more of what we don't have and less of the bad things that we do. And so we grasp. And the more we grasp, the more power we feel. Because that grasping is ultimately a fruitless act. And before I move into the other two noble truths, why do we grasp? Right? Why are we reaching out to hold on to things? I think we do it because we feel alone. We think that we're on our own. We've learned to believe this illusion that we're incomplete somehow, that we're separate from everyone else. We're way over here and everyone else is way over there, and the only way to bridge that gap is to, bring everyone either under our control or to make them like us somehow. To dominate other people, or to say, to submit and say, well, I need you to like me, so I'm going to change myself. Right? And so we grasp. We're trying to, force our life to be a certain way. We dress a certain way. Like the right things, say the right things, make the right amount of money, collect stuff that we spend all our time maintaining. Because we think that makes us complete. Try to make our life fit that picture, that Folger's morning. And we spend all of our time trying to maintain that illusion. We lose ourselves in it. And we subconsciously apply a lot of energy towards maintaining some picture, some identity. In the same way that, the people would perform and spin plates on those long sticks, spend, constantly readjusting and spinning the plates in case any fall down or fall. And that's exhausting. Right? That clinging is exhausting. But the good news is, the Buddha went on to say, in the third noble truth, that we can stop suffering. We don't have to worry about spinning all those plates. We don't have to persist in this constant state of unease and stress and unsatisfactoriness. Because while the Buddha did say that suffering is a very common experience, so common that he could start a sermon with that very fact and people would listen because they're like, well, that's me. That applies to me. Right? It's a choice. Suffering is a choice, not a curse. Pardon me. And because it's a choice, we can do something about it. Right? And that something is the fourth noble truth, the final noble truth. Or, in this case, the Eightfold Path. Right? The path towards liberation. And this is sometimes where folks who are studying Buddhism casually will get a little crossed up. And may lose their way a bit with Buddhism because it becomes a bit more of an intellectual exercise. Like, so wait, there's four big things, and the fourth thing is eight things. Right? And then a lot of energy is spent in just memorization, right? And like, hey, I remember, like, what is Buddhism about? Oh yeah, it's the four noble truths, and the eightfold path, and the five skandhas, and the Brahma Viharas, and the three poisons, and you know, and a lot of energy goes into reciting the teachings, then into practice, right? But all of this path is a doing, and so I want to talk about this fourth truth, this path, as simply as possible, to not cross anyone up, and in the context of pessimism and how we can overcome pessimism. The Eightfold Path, kind of at its core, is about acting and thinking in a way that reduces suffering. Drastic oversimplification, but acting and thinking in ways that reduce suffering. Acting, to reduce suffering in the ways that we show up every day, in the way that we act towards others, the way we speak, how we earn a living. Thinking in ways that reduce suffering by, seeing things as they really are and remaining committed to our practice. Essentially, that. Right? So the Eightfold Path is not about knowing things. It's not about memorizing facts and knowing them. It's about doing something. It's about acting and thinking. Because the path isn't going to walk itself. You need to walk it. You need to commit. You need to do the work. Suffering is easy. It comes very naturally. Pessimism is very easy and can come very naturally. Everyone can do it. All it takes is believing every thought that comes into your head. Every bit of news that you hear, every bit of gossip from your friends, and never challenging those thoughts, putting them to the test. And pessimism is you sharing your suffering with other people and increasing their suffering, right? Because you believe it can't be any other way. The fact that there's a path, implies some responsibility, right? It's a path that has to be walked. Unskillful mental states, like pessimism, believing that everything is bad, that leads to suffering. And cultivating, to fix that, cultivating skillful mental states can free us from suffering. We see this in the Dhammapada, right? The first chapter, the first words in the scripture that's attributed to, phrases of the Buddha, sayings of the Buddha. Mind precedes all mental states. Mind is their chief. They are all mind wrought. If with an impure mind a person speaks or acts, suffering follows him like the wheel that follows the foot of the ox. Right? First noble truth. There's suffering. However, if with a pure mind a person speaks or acts, happiness follows him like a never departing shadow. Right? And I love that because there's that distinction between a cart and a shadow, right? A cart is something that you have to get in. A shadow is something that just sticks with you regardless. The other implication of this being a path that must be walked is that it's going to be unique to you. One of my favorite spiritual metaphors is, that the destination may be similar, but the path is going to be unique. Right? So we may all be going to Wichita, Kansas, right? Middle of the U.S. If you're coming from California, your experience of that path to Wichita is going to be very different than mine if I'm starting in New York. The roads will be different, the terrain will be different, the temperature, the weather will be different, you know? So what does that mean? Why is that difference important? Well, it means that you need to investigate your path individually. You need to investigate your path. And investigating your path means investigating your thoughts. So when you feel that pessimism that comes to you, when you feel that cart following after you with the wobbly wheels, right? Ask yourself, what am I believing? What am I assuming to make me feel pessimistic? What am I assuming to be true? What don't I actually know in this case? You know, and if you follow that line of thinking around, well, I'm pessimistic because everything stinks. Does it really? Follow that out, you know? Investigate that thought. Where does it lead? And you'll find oftentimes with pessimistic thoughts that they pretty quickly cross over into the fantastic and the highly unlikely. Maybe you have pessimism because you just got a new job and you're worried that you're going to screw it up, you know, and everything's going to fall apart. Well, follow that line of thinking and you realize, like, probably not. I got this job because I'm qualified, right? And when we investigate and uncover those thoughts that are causing the pessimism or the lack of truth in the thoughts that are causing our pessimism, we can replace those untrue thoughts with ones that are true, right? Ones that are useful, ones that are maybe more optimistic. And I know a few weeks ago, I gave a talk on the fact that there's no silver bullet for suffering. There's not. I wish it was as simple as sitting on a cushion for so many minutes a day, or chanting the Nembutsu, or reading the Heart Sutra. But there's no silver bullet for suffering or for pessimism. The root of our practice, you know, the key to unraveling the string of pessimism kind of wrapped around the axle of our wagon, is investigating the mind and confronting unskillful and untrue thoughts. When the Buddha, you know, prior to giving his sermon, when he was still sitting underneath the Bodhi tree, what liberated the Buddha was not the sitting. It wasn't the meditation. It wasn't the Bodhi tree, you know, or how long he was doing it. It was his confrontation of unskillful mind states, you know, as represented in part by his confrontation with Mara. We talked about that in a previous talk, right? And in some stories of this confrontation with Mara, this sort of demonic, tempting force that was trying to sway the Buddha from his path so he wouldn't wake up, you know, he tempted him with his 3 daughters. You know, yearning, fulfillment, and heartache, they're sometimes called. Yearning is, well, I want, you know, that grasping. Fulfillment is, well, I have and I can't lose. So, you know, clinging. And heartache, which is, well, I regret, you know. And the Buddha encountered those. And he investigated those. And he recognized those thoughts in himself. And recognized them as himself. And was able to change his relationship to those thoughts and wake up. So when the Buddha did go and decide that he wanted to teach others about waking up and ending suffering, he didn't start with that final fantastic revelation. Because the average person probably couldn't relate to that. He started with the common denominator. We all suffer, right? It may be discouraging to be pessimistic. You know, we recognize that it stresses us out. It stresses our loved ones out, our coworkers. We want to do something about it. So investigate the pessimism. By doing so, we can transform it into a path of liberation and freedom. And ultimately, you know, perhaps an attitude of hopefulness and lightness and optimism. Right? But like I said, it doesn't happen on its own. It takes effort. And if we believe what the Buddha taught and believe the impact of these teachings, on those who have benefited from them over thousands of years, that sense of hope and optimism can actually keep us on the path, right? Sustain our efforts, because we're not condemned to pessimism. There is a nobler way for us to live. And I hope that you will seek that path as a part of your practice. So I hope that these words have been helpful. The moment we receive true and trusting, solid and clear like a diamond, infinite light and life embrace and protect us, liberating us completely. Let us take the 4 immeasurable vows. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to liberate them. Delusions are endless. I vow to end them. The ways of compassion and wisdom are boundless. I vow to embody them. The way is unattainable. I vow to attain it. Let us take the precepts for the community of the vow. I allow my true self to manifest in all aspects of life. I take complete responsibility for my own life and all of my actions. I affirm my personal being and acknowledge it as a path to awakening and freedom. I embrace all aspects of my personal being, including my shadow, so that they may be transformed. I affirm an attitude of openness to my true self, even in the midst of suffering. So, I would like to take some time to chant and allow you to light some incense and chant along. Light incense at your personal altar, your personal centering space. And we'll chant the Nembutsu, Namu Amida Butsu, several times. Between each time, I will knock the mokugyo, our fish drum, and then I will ring a bell, and we'll spend some time in silent contemplation and abiding. And then I'll ring the bell again to bring that time to an end, and then we'll close. Amida To close, let us recite the Bodhisattva's Gatha in recognition of the fact that when we practice together, we practice with everyone who's practicing today, everyone who has ever practiced the Dharma, anyone who ever will walk this path with us. So let us recite the Bodhisattva's Gatha. We dedicate this practice to the welfare of all beings throughout space and time. May it always be so. So as always, I hope that you found this Dharma talk and this liturgy helpful and a benefit to you in your practice. If you want to learn more about us, and our practice, or would like someone to talk to, you can visit us at dragonflysangha.com, Sangha being Sangha, or asksenseitony.com. And like I said, if you want to, read these liturgies along with us, you can check out our Book of Common Meditation on Amazon. It has this liturgy and all of our annual liturgies, as well as some gathas for different situations and different occasions. And also a reminder that if you are in the central PA area, on Monday evenings in Camp Hill, one of my fellow priests, Mike Travisano, is going to be running in-person meditation services. So I would invite you to join him there as well. So as always, I hope that you all have a wonderful week, and thank you.